woman walks into a bank expecting a routine transaction, but instead she's met with disbelief, hostility, and condescension. What would you do if someone told you that you couldn't access your own hard-earned money? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The line at the bank moved slowly, the sound of clicking keyboards and murmured conversations filling the air. Kendall Miles adjusted the strap of her purse on her shoulder, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. She wasn't in the mood to wait. She had a busy afternoon ahead, and this was supposed to be a quick stop, just a withdrawal before heading back to work. When it was finally her turn, she approached the teller with a polite smile and slid her ID and withdrawal slip across the counter. "I'd like to take out $3,500 from my checking account," she said. The young woman behind the glass barely looked at her before taking the paperwork. She glanced at Kendall's ID, her expression unreadable, then tapped a few keys on her computer. Seconds passed, then more. Kendall watched as the woman's brows pulled together in a frown. The teller hesitated, her eyes flicking toward something on the screen. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I can't process this withdrawal." Kendall blinked. "I'm sorry?" "There seems to be an issue," the teller said carefully. "I can't release these funds." Kendall's fingers curled slightly against the counter. "An issue? What kind of issue?" The teller's hesitation stretched a beat too long. Then she glanced over her shoulder and gestured toward a supervisor, a middle-aged woman in a navy blue blazer, her salt and pepper hair pulled into a severe bun. The supervisor walked over with an air of detached authority. "This customer is requesting a large withdrawal," the teller explained in a hushed voice. The supervisor gave Kendall a once-over, then turned her attention to the screen, her lips pursed. "I see." Kendall felt the shift in the air. The way the teller suddenly wouldn't meet her eyes. The way the supervisor's tone carried a weight that had nothing to do with banking procedures. "I'm going to need to verify a few things before we can approve this transaction," the supervisor said finally. Kendall kept her voice even. "My ID is right there. The account is mine." "I understand, ma'am, but for security reasons we need additional verification." "Security reasons?" Kendall repeated, her stomach tightening. "I just need my money. What kind of verification are we talking about?" The supervisor straightened. "We'll need to speak with a manager. It'll just be a few minutes." Kendall exhaled sharply but nodded. "Fine." She stepped aside, pulling out her phone while she waited. A few minutes turned into 10, then 15. She glanced toward the counter, where the teller whispered something to another employee. The supervisor had disappeared into an office. Kendall took a deep breath, her patience running thin. She had never had this problem before. She had been banking here for years. She deposited her checks, paid her bills, never overdrafted, and yet here she was, being treated like a criminal for trying to take out her own money. Another 5 minutes passed before the supervisor returned, her expression unreadable. "Miss Miles," she said, her tone clipped, "we won't be able to approve this withdrawal at this time." Kendall felt her heartbeat quicken. "Excuse me?" "For security purposes, we can't release these funds without further verification," the supervisor repeated. "We need more time to review your account activity." Kendall stared at her. "Review my account? What does that even mean? You have my ID, my account number? You can see my history right there on the screen." "I'm sorry, but this is policy." Kendall's jaw tightened. She could feel the eyes of other customers on her now. The hushed whispers, the way some people shifted uncomfortably. She had seen stories like this before, heard about them, but never expected to experience it firsthand. "You mean to tell me that I can't access my own money because... What? You think it doesn't belong to me?" "That's not what I said, ma'am." "It's exactly what you're implying." The supervisor's lips pressed into a thin line. "If you'd like, we can set up a meeting with an account specialist." Kendall let out a dry laugh. "Oh, so now I need a meeting to get my own money?" The supervisor didn't answer. Kendall felt her skin heat with frustration. She had half a mind to start making a scene, but she knew how that would look. A black woman raising her voice in a bank. She'd be escorted out before she could blink. She took a breath, forcing herself to stay composed. Then she grabbed her phone. "You know what?" she said, meeting the supervisor's gaze head-on. "Forget it." She turned on her heel and walked toward the exit. Before she stepped out, she dialed a number. If the bank wanted to play this game, she had just the person to call. Kendall held the phone to her ear as she stepped outside the bank, her pulse still hammering. The humiliation sat heavy in her chest, but beneath it, a slow-burning anger began to take shape. She had been denied access to her own money. She had been made to feel like a criminal. And for what? The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "Kendall?" She exhaled sharply, steadying herself. "Marcus, I need your help." Marcus Bennett was a longtime friend, an old classmate from college who had gone on to become a financial lawyer with an ironclad reputation. He specialized in cases just like this: banks freezing accounts without cause, questionable financial practices, and, most infuriatingly, racial discrimination disguised as security measures. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice instantly alert. "I just tried to withdraw money from my account," she said, gripping her purse strap. "They refused to give it to me." A pause. Then, "What do you mean they refused?" "I mean, they acted like I was suspicious, like I didn't belong in there. They said they needed additional verification before releasing my funds." Marcus sighed. "Let me guess, no real explanation, just stalling tactics?" "Exactly." Kendall could hear him moving on the other end of the line, likely already pulling up legal precedents in his head. "Which bank?" he asked. "Metro First, on Lexington." "Stay put. I'll handle it." She let out a slow breath, knowing that Marcus wasn't the type to make empty promises. "Thank you." She hung up and walked toward her car, trying to calm herself. But the more she thought about it, the angrier she became. She had been banking at Metro First for years, never had a problem, never had an issue accessing her money. So why today? Why now? She already knew the answer. Kendall sat in her car, scrolling through her phone, searching for stories similar to hers. There were too many. Black customers being denied withdrawals, being questioned about their own money, being humiliated in the very institutions that were supposed to serve them. 15 minutes passed before her phone buzzed again. "I called the bank," Marcus said without preamble. "I spoke to their corporate legal team. They're reviewing the issue right now." Kendall's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "You think they're going to do the right thing?" "They don't have a choice," he said, "because if they don't, they're going to be dealing with more than just bad PR. They'll be dealing with me." Another 10 minutes went by. Then 15. Kendall's phone rang again. It was the bank. She stared at the screen for a moment before answering. "Ms. Miles?" It was the same supervisor from earlier, but now her tone was different. "Yes, I want to sincerely apologize for the inconvenience earlier. After further review, we can process your withdrawal immediately." Kendall closed her eyes for a moment, letting the words settle. "Interesting," she said. "And what changed?" A pause. We were able to verify your account." "Oh?" She let the silence stretch between them. "And that couldn't have been done 20 minutes ago?" The woman hesitated. "You don't have to explain," Kendall cut in. "I'll be right in." She ended the call, grabbed her purse and stepped out of the car. Walking back into the bank, she felt the shift. The tension from earlier had been replaced with a quiet unease. The teller, who had initially turned her away, wouldn't meet her eyes. The other employees avoided looking in her direction altogether. The supervisor was waiting near the counter, clasping her hands together. "Mr. Miles, again, we deeply regret." "Save it." Kendall slid her ID across the counter again. "Run the transaction." The supervisor nodded quickly and motioned for the teller to process the withdrawal. Within minutes, Kendall had the cash in her hand. She took a moment to tuck the bills into her wallet, then met the supervisor's gaze. "I hope you think about this the next time a black customer walks in here and tries to access their own money." The woman swallowed hard. "Yes, ma'am." Kendall turned and walked out without another word. As she stepped outside, the weight in her chest began to lift. The anger was still there, but now it was accompanied by something else. Power. She had made one call and it had changed everything. Kendall sat in her car, gripping the steering wheel, her heart still pounding. The wad of cash in her purse felt heavier than it should have, not because of the money itself, but because of what it took to get it. A simple withdrawal had turned into a battle she never should have had to fight. She exhaled, shaking her head. This wasn't just about her. This had happened to too many people before her, and it would keep happening unless something changed. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat. "Marcus." "You good?" he asked as soon as she answered. "I got the money." She heard him exhale through the line. "I figured. I just got confirmation from their legal department. They tried to brush it off, told me it was a misunderstanding." Kendall let out a dry laugh. "Of course they did." "Yeah, but we both know what that was." They sat in silence for a beat. "This is bigger than just you, Kendall," Marcus finally said. "You know that, right?" She knew. The stories she had read while waiting in her car flashed through her mind. The elderly black man who was accused of fraud for trying to cash a check. The woman who was denied a loan despite perfect credit. The young college student who was treated like a thief when he deposited his first paycheck. "I know," she said. "I have a friend, civil rights attorney. If you want to do something about this, I can set up a call." Kendall bit her lip, staring out the windshield. Did she want to go that far? Would it even change anything? She had a life, a job, responsibilities. But then she thought about how she had felt, standing in that bank, being dismissed, humiliated, questioned over something that was hers. And she thought about all the people who had gone through the same thing and hadn't had a Marcus to call. "Set up the call," she said. The next day, Kendall found herself sitting across from a woman with a fierce gaze and a crisp blazer, sipping on a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. "I've been dealing with cases like yours for years," attorney Dana Reeves said, flipping through a folder of paperwork. "The problem is, banks cover their tracks well. They hide behind vague policies and security measures that disproportionately affect black and brown customers, but they make sure there's no direct evidence of racial bias." Kendall nodded, arms crossed. "So, what can we do?" Dana leaned forward. "The key is exposure. We need to make noise, and not just legal noise, media, social pressure. People need to know this is happening." Kendall's stomach tightened. "You're talking about going public?" Dana nodded. "If you're willing." She hesitated. Going public meant attention, scrutiny, people dissecting her life, doubting her, defending the bank, pretending this wasn't a real issue. But it also meant something else. It meant she could make sure this didn't happen to someone else. "I'll do it," she said. 2 weeks later, the headline hit. Local bank accused of racial discrimination after denying black woman access to her own funds. Kendall's phone blew up. Friends, co-workers, strangers, some offering support, others telling her she was making a big deal out of nothing. The bank released a statement. They denied wrongdoing, of course, called it an unfortunate miscommunication. Then something unexpected happened. People started sharing their own stories. One by one, comments and messages flooded in. "This happened to me too. They did the same thing to my father. I've been banking there for years, and I've never had an issue, until I brought in a check from my black-owned business." Kendall read them all, feeling something shift inside her. This wasn't just her fight anymore. Kendall sat at her kitchen table, her laptop open, the glow of the screen illuminating the determined look on her face. The article had gone viral, not just local news, national outlets were picking it up. Her inbox was flooded with messages, some from people sharing their own stories, others from reporters requesting interviews. But the most surprising email came from Metro First's corporate office. They wanted a meeting. Marcus had been the one to call her first. "This means they're feeling the heat," he had said. "They don't want this getting any bigger than it already has." And now, sitting in a sleek conference room across from a panel of stiff-looking executives, Kendall could see the truth in his words. The bank president, an older man with graying hair and a carefully neutral expression, cleared his throat. "Ms. Miles, let me start by saying we deeply regret your experience at our branch. That is not the standard of service we strive for." Kendall kept her expression unreadable. One of the other executives, a woman in a sharp black suit, leaned forward. "We understand that this situation has caused distress, and we take these concerns very seriously." She watched them carefully, waiting for the part where they tried to make this go away. "We'd like to offer a formal apology," the woman continued, sliding a document across the table. "And we'd be happy to discuss financial compensation for the inconvenience you've experienced." There it was. Kendall glanced at Marcus, who was seated beside her, arms crossed. He didn't have to say anything. His expression said it all. She picked up the paper, skimming it. An apology, a payout, a carefully worded statement that placed all the blame on miscommunication. She set it down. "I'm not here for a check," she said. A flicker of surprise crossed their faces. "I want policy changes," she continued. "Real ones. Not just an internal memo that no one reads." The president shifted in his seat. "Ms. Miles, I assure you we are reviewing our procedures to ensure—" "I don't want reviews," she cut in. "I want action." She reached into her bag, pulling out a folder. "These are documented complaints from other customers," she said, sliding it across the table. "People who have experienced the same kind of discrimination I did at your branches, and those are just the ones who spoke up." The room was silent. "I want you to implement an external audit of your security policies," she continued. "I want mandatory racial bias training for your employees. I want an oversight committee that actually holds people accountable." The executives exchanged glances. Marcus leaned forward. "She's not asking," he said. Another beat of silence. Then the woman in the black suit let out a slow breath. "We'll need time to review." "You have a week," Kendall said. The president's brows lifted. "A week? Or we take this to the next level. More headlines, more media attention, more pressure." She could see it on their faces. They knew they were already losing the battle. Finally, the president nodded. "We'll be in touch." When Kendall walked out of the bank's headquarters, she felt lighter than she had in weeks. This wasn't just about getting her money anymore. This was about making sure no one else had to fight just to be treated fairly. A week later, the bank released a public statement. They weren't just apologizing. They were implementing policy changes, an external review, a bias training initiative. It wasn't everything, but it was a start. As Kendall read through the announcement, her phone buzzed, a text from Marcus. "You did it." She smiled. No, they did, and they weren't done yet.